It's the last show of the year, and we're looking at some of the biggest stories of the year. And what bigger story as we got towards the end of this year than the 2016 presidential race? We're going to look at three clips that really represent some of the biggest storylines of the 2016 election so far. On the one hand, Bernie Sanders, and we will see Bernie Sanders at Liberty University, where he slayed the crowd. And it really was proof that the ideas of Bernie Sanders, portrayed by so many as these extreme left ideas, actually resonate with Americans from the entire political spectrum. And then we will look at a clip about Donald Trump and a clip about Ben Carson. Two clips that I believe really tell us the most important things about Donald Trump and Ben Carson, which is that they really don't know a lot of stuff and they wouldn't make good presidents. Although we hope they will stay in the Republican primary race as long as possible. So reviewing some of the biggest storylines of 2015, Bernie Sanders, no question, one of those biggest storylines, as well as Donald Trump and Ben Carson. Take a look. One of the most interesting individual little stories from these early days of the 2016 presidential campaign happened yesterday. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders spoke at the private Christian college, Liberty University. This is the traditionally far-right religious school. It's in Lynchburg, Virginia. It was founded by the extremist televangelist and pastor Jerry Falwell. This is a perfect speaking gig for candidates like Rick Santorum or Ben Carson, for Ted Cruz. Remember, everybody, all the student body being forced to go to the mandatory rally for Ted Cruz. Not really a great fit for the more moderate Republicans, and really not a good fit, you would think, for one of the most progressive candidates in a long time, Bernie Sanders. But Bernie Sanders spoke there yesterday. He was asked a question about protecting unborn children, and the entire exchange is absolutely, endlessly fascinating, Lewis. The question was about protecting the unborn. Two things to pay attention to. Number one, pay attention to the raucous standing ovation and applause for the anti-abortion, anti-choice language that was used by David Nasser, the house pastor, or whatever he's called at Liberty University, in framing the question. But then, interestingly, pay attention to the reaction to Bernie Sanders' answer to the question. Let's look.
Senator Sanders, you've talked in your campaign about how it is immoral to protect the billionaire class at the expense of our most vulnerable in society, obviously children. You just mentioned that even in your talk with us earlier. A majority of Christians would agree with you, but here's the question. A majority of Christians would agree with you, but would also go further and say that children in the womb need our protection even more. How do you reconcile So the question, sir, is obviously you can see this is what they want to ask. Well, this is what's on there. How do you reconcile the two? And again, I know that you have a different view. I know that you, sir, and I don't have to be eye to eye on it, but I sense a real sincerity in you in wanting to see our children protected. Can you see, sir, how we see the child in the womb as the most vulnerable that needs protection?
I do understand.
Yes, sir.
But I do also understand, I understand this is an area where we disagree. I do understand and I do believe that it is improper for the United States government or state government to tell every woman in this country the very painful and difficult choice that she has to make on that issue. And I honestly don't want to be too provocative here, but very often conservatives say, you know, get the government out of my life. I don't want the government telling me what to do. But on this very sensitive issue, of which this nation is divided, right. A lot of people agree with you, a lot of people agree with me. But my view is, I respect absolutely a family that says, no, we are not going to have an abortion. I understand that, I respect that. But I would hope that other people respect the very painful and difficult choice that many women feel they have to make and don't want the government telling them what they have to do.
This clip really shows me what is refreshing about Bernie Sanders. There's nothing that feels crafted or concocted about his answer. It's just his honest view. It should and does appeal to at least some people on both sides. And there was more applause than I would have anticipated for Bernie Sanders speaking at Liberty University.
There was. He wasn't afraid to say that we differ on this issue. And I wonder how many people were actually enlightened when he started bringing up, things about the Republican budget and its lack of morality. But there did seem to be a fair amount of applause even for that. And so, I'm hoping that he has a bunch of supporters in that crowd.
Even the politicians that would be more on the side of the Liberty University crowd, when they're asked questions, they sort of hem and haw and waffle and speak in generalities and talking points. Bernie Sanders stands by his convictions. He explains why these are his convictions. These are the exact same things he says in front of liberal audiences. And he got some cheers for it. This was not ever going to be his crowd, but he gives the same message that he gives to a liberal crowd, and it does to some degree resonate. And this is just further confirmation that the Bernie policies are not fringe extremist ideas. These are the popular mainstream policies. It's just that they get all wrapped up in names like communism and socialism and blah, blah, blah. And that is just a distraction because these are pretty reasonable, middle of the road ideas that Bernie Sanders is presenting.
And people need to keep sharing videos of Bernie Sanders and the Bernie Sanders meme quotes, because that's really how you get this message across. I mean, Dave, imagine if we didn't have social media right now. What would Bernie's name recognition look like without all of that?
Yeah, it'd be even lower than it currently is. And we'll continue to track where that goes. Fascinating. Bernie slaying at Liberty University, not a headline we would have anticipated. As proof of the fact that I don't think Donald Trump has any clue what he's talking about, we now go to video of Donald Trump over the weekend being interviewed by George Stephanopoulos on ABC's This Week. If you don't like cringing, you might want to tune away from this next segment. Donald Trump has talked for a while now about his immigration ideas. He's going to deport the illegal immigrants. He's going to build a wall, blah, blah, blah. George Stephanopoulos decided to speak very specifically to Donald Trump about how he would do that. Let's discuss the costs. Let's discuss how it would be done. And Donald Trump imploded, completely fell apart. It became abundantly clear he has no idea what he's talking about. Let's take a look at this video. Brace yourselves. Get the children out of the room because this is absolutely cringeworthy. Take a look.
Look at this from the American Action Forum conservative group. They say the federal government would have to spend roughly $400 to $600 billion to address the 11.2 million undocumented immigrants. Each immigrant would have to be apprehended, detained, legally processed, transported to his or her home country. In turn, this would shrink the labor force by 11 million workers, reduce real GDP by $1.6 trillion. Are you willing to pay that price, and where are you going to get the money?
Well, first of all, they're wrong. And, Jeb is a very low-energy person. He'd never be able to do it. He's the one that said they come out of an act of love, okay? This is an act of love. These are people coming, and many of them, you look at what's happening with the crime, many of them are really causing tremendous problems. And they would be out really fast, immediately. First day we start that movement. We need a wall. We have to get a wall. We need great security, and we're going to have a wall that will be not let people in, George. And by the way, legally, if you're legal, you can come in, and we'll cherish you.
But let me press you on the cost right there, Mr. Trump. They're saying $400, $600 billion. It would require big government apparatus to take everybody down. If you don't think those numbers are right, how much is it going to cost, and where are you going to get the money?
Well, it's costing us $130 billion a year, and that's peanuts compared to what the real cost is, George, for the way we have it now. You have so many illegals. We don't even know how many illegals. I hear 11 million. I hear 30 million. The government has no idea. We have lost control of our country. We've lost control of our borders. The government has no idea how many illegals there are. I've been hearing 11 million for 5 years. Then the other day I heard 30. Nobody has any idea.
So if
They
there's
have
no
lost
idea,
control.
how are you going to round them all up? Where are you going to get the money? Where are you going to get the forces? Exactly how are you going to do it? What are the specifics
George,
here?
it's called management. The first thing we have to do is secure the border, but it's called management. And we'll get people back in, the really good ones. We're going to expedite it so they get back in, so they can at least come in legally. But
You
we
keep
have to do
declaring
it.
how you're
It's
going to do it, but you
management.
don't say how.
Excuse me, George?
You declare how you're going to do it, but you don't say how.
George, I'm telling you, it's called management. You can do this, and we can expedite the good ones to come back in. And everybody wants that, but they have to come in legally. We have a country. We're a country of laws. We're a country of borders. How can you have a country without a border?
That's right, Lewis. Donald Trump would do it through management. Well, I'm convinced that sounds like a pretty logical strategy to me.
Management. He is doing what many politicians are guilty of, and that's making promises and saying you're going to do things with no explanation as to how, and usually things that are very expensive. But can he manage his way through this?
I don't think so. And, never mind that the costs combined with the GDP loss would be staggering. Never mind that Donald Trump claims to be a small government conservative, and what he's suggesting would be a hugely intrusive, large government apparatus, as George Stephanopoulos accurately points out. I wonder, this is the concern I have, because it's obvious Donald Trump knows nothing about immigration. Will the Trump fans abandon him when they realize that he doesn't even understand his own ideas, many of which would require absurd government spending or intrusion, which conservatives claim to oppose, as well as violations of U.S. law or trade policy? Will the Trump supporters abandon him when they realize that, or are they sticking with him?
I don't see his followers abandoning him. I think he's already made it pretty clear that he doesn't understand these issues, and they're sticking with him. How much worse is it going to get? I guess if he wins the primary and has to debate whoever, it might become more clear. But are they going to vote for the Democrat after that? No.
Probably not. And if you look at some of the comments online to video clips of this exchange and news articles written about this, there are conservatives who are saying, oh, George Stephanopoulos was being overly aggressive and sandbagging Trump. George Stephanopoulos just asked the question, how will you do this? And then said, hey, here's some data about this. How will you do this? And Trump had no answer other than management. If your critique is of George Stephanopoulos, you're either willfully ignorant or just blind to the reality of that exchange.
It was like being angry at Katie Couric for asking Sarah Palin, what do you read? And, was that sandbagging? I don't think so. Was that gotcha journalism?
Lewis, that was a completely unfair question. Nobody knows what they read unless they've been prepped on what they read by their staff. And that was absolutely gotcha journalism. I was interested to read an article in the New York Times yesterday, which was posted to our David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit, which explained that Ben Carson, the Republican presidential candidate, has really been having trouble grasping foreign policy. According to his own advisors, he seems to just not get it. And this became much more clear in the last week. Ben Carson, number one, claiming that China has intervened militarily in Syria. That just didn't happen. I mean, it just flat out did not happen. And two of his top advisors said in interviews that he has struggled to master the intricacies of the Middle East and national security, and that even intense tutoring was having little effect. He is being intensely tutored, and it is having no impact. Let's take a look at that a quote from the New York Times article. Quote, nobody has been able to sit down with him and have him get one iota of intelligent information about the Middle East. This is according to Dwayne Claridge, a top advisor to Ben Carson on terrorism and national security. Claridge also said that Mr. Carson needs weekly conference calls to brief him on foreign policy, quote, so we can make him smart. And then it really got bad. When Ben Carson appeared on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, I'm calling this Ben Carson's Sarah Palin moment. I'll remind you what I mean by that. This is when Sarah Palin was asked by Katie Couric during the run-up to the 2008 election, name a publication that you read, and then this happened.
And when it comes to establishing your worldview, I was curious, what newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what one specifically, I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years. I have a vast variety of sources where we get our news to. Alaska isn't a foreign country where it's kind of suggested. It seems like, wow, how could you keep in touch with what the rest of Washington, D.C. may be thinking and doing when you live up there in Alaska? Believe me, Alaska is like a microcosm of America.
Yeah, so that was gotcha journalism. As we remember, Lewis, Chris Wallace, very similarly, asking a super simple question to Ben Carson. At least it's a question that should elicit a real answer from a leading Republican presidential candidate. You say, Dr. Carson, you want to build a coalition to fight ISIS. Well, who do you build the coalition with? In other words, name a country that is a friend of the United States, right? If we boil it down, that's the question. Name a country that is a friend of the United States. Here's how it happened. It is just embarrassing for Ben Carson. I almost feel bad for the guy.
Sir, controlling.
If I may, let me just focus on the military component, because obviously after the slaughter of over 100 people, while all of those are important components, the military component is the most immediate one. And you have said that you would, as president, try to create an international coalition militarily to go after ISIS. How would you put that together? Who would you call first?
Yeah.
Well, what I was just explaining is, how we use the resources that we have. That includes some of our special ops people working in conjunction with an effective fighting force there. Those are the kinds of things that will create enthusiasm as we begin to take back the land, take back the areas, and damage their image throughout the world.
But who would you call first, specifically, to put together an international military coalition?
My point being that if we get out there and we really lead, and it appears that we're making progress, then all of the Arab states and even the non-Arab states, who I think are beginning to recognize that the jihad movement is global. It is not just local in the Middle East. But if we fight it there, they will have to pool their resources in that area, and then we won't have to necessarily fight them here. That's what I'm saying.
But can you tell us who you would call first, sir?
Round 3.
On the international scene.
I would call for all of the Arab states to be involved in this. I would call for all of our traditional allies to be involved in this. I don't want to leave anybody out, because
this is just
really,
amazing. Okay, let's stop it there. So it's the same. Sarah Palin was asked, what do you read? She said, well, I read stuff. And then the follow-up was, well, just name something. And she says, I read everything. And Ben Carson's doing the same thing. Well, who would you call? First, it's a non-answer. And then it's, well, I would call all of the Arab states and all of the non-Arab states. He would call every country, Lewis. That's who he would call.
The answer here, my easy answer, just say Israel. Right?
I know. I was thinking to myself, you would imagine that at a minimum, you could at least name some allies we've had, right? Say, well, the UK, we would talk to the UK, and maybe France. I mean, they're taking action. They've just been attacked. And of course, you can always say Israel, right? Say anything to avoid looking totally clueless. What do you read? All of them. Who would you call all the Arab and non-Arab states? Is this going to be called a gotcha question as well?
I think it's a fair gotcha question, right? Because they know that he's not up to speed on foreign policy.
But I don't know that. I mean, you're giving the reporters credit in that they know that this guy's clueless. He presents himself as a Republican candidate. I don't think it's a gotcha question to say, who would be, in your mind, our allies if you wanted to build a military coalition? Just give us a list of countries. Name a single country.
Well, I think everyone knows that foreign policy is not this guy's strong suit.
That's for sure. Even his advisors know.
Yeah, throw some red meat out there. Republicans love hearing about the alliance with Israel. Throw it out there.
We will, of course, continue following election 2016, starting in 2016 with our next show. We will take our last break, and next, we will look at just a hilarious comment about American foreign policy that stands out to me as one of the funniest clips of the year.